Hey all, we're back again. This video is specifically for Caleb, who asked the question. Caleb, I'm going to warn you now, you're going to have a facepalm moment, so hang on for the ride, but I already found your error. I know what you're doing, and I think the problem is you're trusting your calculator. So always make sure that you use your brain before you trust your calculator 100%, and let's walk through why. So we're going to look at question 17 here of placing points on the coordinate grid to determine, well, first off, to make a polygon, and then determine what that polygon actually is. So what we should have when we place these points on the polygon, I need to cover this so you don't see everything to begin with, is we have A, B, C, D here. See if it'll focus. So A is at our negative 5, 14, B is at negative 2, 11, C is at negative 5, 8, and D is at negative 8, 11. Now this looks right now like it's going to be a square, but we don't know that for certain, so let's work through the process at least first to find our distance, because that is what Caleb specifically asked for. Now one thing that you are going to want to check is whether or not this angle right in here is a right angle, because even once we find the distance, even though, or I can prove that all four sides are the same distance, that's fine, but it isn't a square until I know that those angles are right angles. So then if it's not a right angle, then it might be a rhombus. So we set up our distance formula is really the change in y squared and the change in x squared, but we find that change by doing y2 minus y1 and x2 minus x1. So the side that I chose to start with is this side right here on top where I put the question mark. So I'm going to use points A and B. So we plug in my y values. So I grab the y from A and the y from B. So I do 14 minus 11. And I'm going to square that. And then I grab my x's, so I do negative 5 minus negative 2. Now this is where it gets dangerous. Minus a negative, always pay attention. That's going to become plus a positive. So I'm actually then coming down here. I know that 14 minus 11 gives me 3. I know that minus a negative becomes addition, so I'll have negative 5 plus 2 actually. And this is where it starts to get tricky. 3 squared turns into 9. That's simple. But negative 3 squared is not negative 9. When we think about negative 3 squared, that's really negative 3 times negative 3. However, when you type it in your calculator, if you type in negative 3 squared, your calculator's doing the 3 squared and then putting the negative on it. If you type it in your calculator in parentheses, it will actually take the value negative 3 and square it, doing the negative 3 times negative 3. But either way, that gives us a positive 9, not a negative 9. So when you were getting 0 as your answer, that is the reason why. If you were getting a negative 9 here, then these would have canceled out. We know that distance between 2 points absolutely cannot be 0 unless they're in the same location, so that should have been the red flag that told you that something was messed up. I then have my 9 plus 9 gives me 18. Radical 18, I then want to simplify. So I think about the factors of 18 involving one perfect square at least. So I know that 9 is a perfect square, and 9 times 2 gives me 18. So then I set up that this is actually radical 9 times 2, and then I can pull my radical 9 out because I know that's 3, and I get 3 radical 2 as my final answer for that distance. So I'm going to pause the video and set up solving another one of these, but hopefully that helps you a lot in identifying why you were getting 0 for that answer there. I'm going to do one more of these and maybe check out the slope just to determine what that polygon actually is. Alright, so looking at the distance then from B to C, if we want to cover this distance right here, we're going to use that same process of the delta y squared plus the delta x squared. So my delta y, I can take my 11 minus my 8 and see that that distance or difference is 3. Which is this 3 right here. My change in x is negative 2 minus a negative 5. Now I could have flipped around that subtraction if I wanted to, doesn't really make a difference. So negative 2 minus a negative 5, that then becomes addition, and negative 2 plus 5 gives me positive 3. I know that 3 squared is going to be 9 again, so I get 9 plus 9, and we get radical 18, which shows me that this distance from B to C is the same as the distance from A to B. I could continue to do this process all the way around and check the other 4 distances, but in the sake of time, I'm not going to do all that here. The last thing we want to check is one of these angles. So I'm going to compare slope using rise and run. Now I like to do this, at least one of them on the outside of the square or my potential square, just to have some space. So my rise from C to B is 3 as we already determined. My run is 3 as we already determined. So that slope positive rise of 3, positive run of 3. That slope right there is a slope of 1. That's good as long as this slope is a negative reciprocal. I can even look at the line as it cuts down my graph paper. I can see that this slope is a negative 1, but I can prove that by looking at the rise and run. My rise now is negative 3 and my run is positive 3. So since I have a rise of negative 3 and a run of positive 3, that would mean that that slope is negative 1. And these two slopes then are in fact opposite reciprocals of each other, so they are perpendicular, and we can see that this angle is now proven to be a right angle. So I could check that with my other lines as we go around, but I can look at my graph and see that, yeah, this has a slope of positive 1, this has a slope of negative 1, all of these are going to make right angles, and assuming that all of those distances are still radical 18, then the shape that we have here does end up being a square. So Caleb, hopefully that helped you. As always, do not trust your calculator 100%. Make sure that your brain is turned on and thinking about what you're doing so that these sort of mistakes do not make you fall into the trap. So let me know if you have any other questions, comments, or concerns. Aside from that, I will see you guys soon in class.